aristocrat, libertine, seducer, gambler, and former page of Marie-Antoinette, Alexandre de Tilly shares in his memoirs his life at Versailles and Paris in the last decades of the 18th century. Though he spent his entire life chasing women and collecting romantic adventures, he was also an avid reader, and couldn't fail to read the bestseller of the time, Liaisons, Dangereuses, published in 1782. Its author, Choderlos de Laclos, could have hardly guessed that many years later, in 1790, he will meet the embodiment of his main character Valmont in the figure of Alexandre de Tilly. Laclos will reveal to him the secret of his novel.
Lettre première. Cécile Volange à Sophie Carnet, aux Ursulines de. Tu vois, ma bonne amie, que je tiens parole, et que les bonnets et les pompons ne prennent pas tout mon temps. Il m'en restera toujours pour toi. J'ai pourtant vu plus de parures dans cette seule journée que dans les 4 ans que nous avons passés ensemble, et je crois que la superbe Tanville aura plus de chagrin à ma première visite, où je compte bien la demander, qu'elle n'a cru nous en faire toutes les fois qu'elle est venue nous voir in fiocchi. Maman m'a consultée sur tout. Elle me traite beaucoup moins en pensionnaire que par le passé. J'ai une femme de chambre à moi, j'ai une chambre et un cabinet dont je dispose, et je t'écris à un secrétaire très joli dont on m'a remis la clé et où je peux renfermer tout ce que je veux. Maman m'a dit que je la verrais tous les jours à son lever, qu'il suffisait que je fusse coiffée pour dîner, parce que nous serions toujours seuls, et qu'alors
It was about this time that a book appeared which caused a prodigious commotion in the public. This book sets its author at the crossroads between blame and praise, contempt and esteem. It is an outrage to the morals of the whole nation. It is a book that every woman admits having read through. It should have been condemned by all men, and yet in its kind it is worthy to rank with classic works in the best libraries. I reproach myself with having passionately admired it. I longed to know Monsieur de Laclos, but it was not until many years later before occasion arose to lead me to discuss with him his too celebrated novel, and to learn from his lips what was fable or truth in this elegant and cynical production. I finally met him in 1791 in England, whither he accompanied Monsieur the Duc d'Orléans on a strange mission. I attempted once or twice, when in London, to learn from him the whole mystery of this book, because I was convinced that such a book cannot come into a man's head without preliminary data. But he politely evaded my questions, and gave me no satisfaction. At last, boredom delivered him up to me. We were at the levee of the Prince of Wales, who spent a long time at his toilet, and was late in arriving. Monsieur de Laclos had no very courtly manners, but all the gloomy impatience of a philosopher, or a conspirator, and preferred to talk rather than pull out his watch and feel fidgety. Here is what he nearly said to me. I was in a barracks in the island of Ré, bored by the training for a profession which was never to bring me great promotion or great consideration. I resolved to write a book which would be quite outside the ordinary trend, which would make a sensation and echo over the world after I left it. One of my friends had several very notorious adventures. He was a man especially born for women. He had taken me into his confidence. I laughed at his pranks and sometimes helped him with my advice. I knew him to have a mistress who was quite equal to Madame de Merteuil, but it was at Grenoble that I saw the original whom mine is only a feeble copy, a Marquise de Ltd.PM, of whom the whole town used to tell stories worthy of the days of the most insatiable Roman empresses. I took notes and firmly resolved to make use of them when time and place allowed it. I had also put on record several affairs of my youth, which were rather spicy. I blended all these varied fragments together. I invented the rest, especially the character of Madame de Touvel, which is no ordinary thing. I bestowed as much care on my style as I am capable of, and threw my book among the public. In the main, Monsieur de Laclos' pictures are exaggerations and caricatures which those persons who knows no better have taken for a startling description of a certain class. Under this aspect, the book is a wave of the revolutionary floods, which have submerged the court. It is one of the 1,000 flashes of that storm.
Though the identity of the main characters is still debated by historians today, Madame de Merteuil would be copied after Madame DLTDPM, Madame de la Tour du Pin Montauban, who was in her early 20s when Laclos heard of her at Grenoble, where he was living as a young officer. Laclos himself may have disguised himself under the character of Prévent, who was one of Madame de Merteuil's lovers. What is certain, though, is that in less than 1 month, 2,000 copies of the book were sold, which was a huge success for the time. Even Marie-Antoinette owned a richly ornated copy, but without any title on the cover. And when Lafayette was made prisoner of the Austrians in August 1792, he only carried one book with him, and it was this one. Pierre-Ambroise François Choderlos de Laclos was an artillery officer, captain, later general, inventor of the shell, and a scientist. He left behind him one single book, a cruel and delicate novel, written in 6 months and filled with 20 years of bitterness, anger, and careful observations. His successful novel, though, has been a curse to him, as he was always mistaken for Valmont wherever he went. He wandered in Paris, congratulated, admired, and inspiring fear. The journalists of the time thought it was a moral book, teaching lessons to mothers and daughters. But a careful analysis reveals that Laclos contradicts the moral he seems defending. The novel remains ambiguous on purpose. The 175 letters of the book start at the summer solstice and end at the winter solstice, leading all the characters to an eternal, frozen hell. When Laclos met Tilly in London, he has left literature. He is now playing chess in politics. He works as the secrétaire des commandements, personal secretary of the Duc d'Orléans, royal prince and the most popular enemy of the king and the queen. Marie-Antoinette despises him. It also happens that he is the richest man of France. Le Duc d'Orléans, with his shadow Laclos, injects millions in the revolution, his entire fortune, and Laclos applies in politics all the tricks and techniques taught by the libertines. He does everything he can to see the Duc d'Orléans seated on the throne. He knows how to manipulate crowds, trigger efficient riots, how to cheat in elections. With heavy bags of coins, everything is possible. Now, playing chess in politics during these years is at high risk. In 1794, the Duc d'Orléans is guillotined, and Laclos put into jail to be guillotined the next day, though he will be free after spending 1 full year in jail. At the same time, Alexandre de Tilly escapes the guillotine at the very last minute and finds refuge in England in the arms of English ladies. Like Valmont, Alexandre de Tilly is accomplished in the art of conversation, extremely important in the 18th century in France. Conversation allows to shine, dominate assemblies, and to conquer hearts in the boudoir. He also mastered the subtle art of writing letters to seduce women. Some excerpts of his memoirs are complete imitation of Valmont's doing in Liaisons Dangereuses.
The quickest way to secure love is to speak to women of an old attachment and of one's sensibility in a former relationship. I had hoped that an affection to which I had given up my whole heart would be the last of my life, which was to be spent entirely beside her to whom I wished to consecrate it, After this pompous bombast, supported by animated pantomime, I thought it was time to withdraw, leaving behind two impressions. One of deep emotion, which is always infectious, and the other of a pride that disdained what it had seemed to desire. I had kept my eyes on her nearly all the time, except in the intervals when I thought it was useful to let her own have a chance. Mine were dim, laden with grief and oppression, as I had not much more to say which would fit my scheme, and wishing beside to induce a strong emotion, I risked a fainting fit, which had a prodigious success. For not daring to ring, she hastened to proffer such help as the most zealous anxiety could suggest. She had started to unfasten my clothes when I considered all had gone far enough. Whatever is overdone fails in its effect. The lucky appearance of a few tears, which came to me I know not whence, completed the illusion of this truly pathetic scene. Their source was, I believe, the sudden thought of all the trouble I was giving myself. To be flatly dismissed by a woman of whatever class or standing she might be has always been highly unpleasant to me. This is a weakness which my reason reproaches me for, but has not been able to conquer. I wrote a sentimental little note. It was left unanswered. I asked her to send back my letters and my portrait. Silence again. I threatened to come and fetch them myself. Renewed display of silence. I then rushed to her rooms. I went up in a rage. I behaved very wrongly, and with so much bad taste as to break or knock over furniture in her bedroom, and the only excuse I can find for that today is that I intended to wrong her in such a way as to make it impossible for me to ever see her again.
What makes our Comte so special in the Libertines portrait gallery of the late 18th century is a unique quality. All his exploits in love and gallantry, however irresponsible they may be, were the outcome of genuine attachment and sincere love. He was a romantic libertine and fell in love with his conquest most of the time, and when he was heartbroken, he took a very special remedy.
I had many times been left by a woman, among others, one whom I worshipped. The day on which we had separated was the very day on which we have vowed never to leave each other. Seldom has she taken so much trouble to bewitch me. In losing her, I sink into utter nothingness. She had depopulated my world. I was inconsolable. I drew up a concise and detailed memorandum, a methodical list of her barbarities, of her black deeds, her cold treacheries, some of the atrocious words which had escaped her. This list I would read over and over to myself all day long. I carried it about with me constantly, but at last I believed myself secure. For 3 months I had no need to read my beneficent document. She hardly ever came into my mind. Reader, you might believe me cured. I thought the same. It was 8 o'clock in the evening of an autumn day. The town in which I was living was big, but at that time deserted. At the corner of 2 broad streets I saw 2 women, one dressed in white with a scarlet cashmere shawl. My eyes could not leave her. I seemed to detect in the air the scent she had the habit of using. That voice, which I had not heard for so long, pierced my heart like a dagger. She was gazing at me. She fled. As for me, I leaned against a milestone to avoid falling on the ground. Then I dragged myself home with a tremendous effort. All my old wounds were once again open. I had to write and to rewrite that fatal list. I was in a box at the theatre, Rue Feydeau, the next to one occupied by an English lady, more noted in London for her grace and beauty than for her virtue. I already knew her well enough to be able to pursue the acquaintance. I had seen her on another visit to Paris, when she had refused to me what she had granted to others, but I had not had the luck to please her, and that was all. However that may be, this new occasion was favorable. To the melting melodies of Paisiello and Cimarosa, I thought I might with better advantage blend words of a tenderness this time openly declared. I had reason to believe, in fact, that my cause was prospering. After a few preliminaries in a low voice, she appointed midnight as the happy hour of fulfillment. The temple was to be furnished, lodgings in the Faubourg Saint-Germain. I arrived to the minute. A sort of chambermaid received me and encouraged me in barbarous French to go to bed. She added that mistress would be back directly. I suppose that on returning from the theatre, she had given orders to this trusty woman. I went to bed. I read as if I were at home. I slept till morning without extinguishing a single candle. How queer if I had set fire to the house! The same woman peeped through the door and left a very short note, which said that a series of unheard-of accidents had upset a charming plan, and that I was to go to Chantilly in the evening and to settle in the coaching-house. With the docility of a fool, I did everything the ungracious woman had prescribed. 12 hours later, I realized I had been duped. If I had been in the mood to follow her, I would have danced attendance and lain down in all the beds of France. I took the liberty, 6 years later, to acquit by a bad joke, on the banks of the Thames, the bill of exchange with this beauty had drawn on me by the Seine.